If the Paris government decided to build walls around the most dangerous district in the city, but a parkour expert living there tried to eliminate the criminals so the government would tear down those walls one day, what would you do? Hey everyone, today on Turbo Recap we're following District 13, so let's subscribe and boost that like button. Now let's get into it. In 2010 in the city of Paris, the government decided to build walls around the districts with high crime rates, to try to prevent these crimes from spreading to other areas of Paris. And then we go inside the 13th district and see the place is full of gangs and substance users, with dealers walking freely through the streets carrying firearms and nothing happens. But there's a guy named Lino who's trying to end crime in the district. He uses his parkour skills to steal substances from dealers and prevent more people from getting addicted. And one day, a dealer nicknamed K2 arrives at the building where Lino lives to settle the score, but the building's guards point their guns at K2 and don't let him in. So the dealer explains he doesn't want to start a shootout and just wants to talk to Lino, and then he asks to write his cell phone number on one of the guards' hands so Lino can contact him later. But we soon see this was just an excuse for K2 to get close to the guard to take him out. And then he kicks the other guard's gun and knocks him out too, and then more dealers arrive by car to invade the building. And meanwhile, Lino is dumping several bags of powder into the bathtub. He even mixes the substance with some cleaning products to ruin it. But in another part of the building, two other guards are watching a Brazilian soap opera, and you can even see Antonio Fagundes appearing on the screen. So they notice someone is using the elevator and suspect this, but they start arguing to decide who will leave the TV to go check what it is. But this gives K2 the necessary time to get there and take out both of them. Next, K2 invades a resident's apartment and takes him hostage to show which apartment Lino lives in. And when they get there, one of the dealers shoots several times in Lino's direction, but K2 tells the other dealers not to shoot, because they need to take Lino alive. And hearing this, the guy realizes he can use his parkour to escape, so he does several amazing maneuvers and manages to get through this tiny window. And then the dealers keep chasing him, and Lino hangs on a rope outside the building. And this poor guy even tries to imitate him and ends up falling from the building, going straight to hell. Next, Lino uses a fire escape to reach the roof, and then he builds momentum and does a big jump to the next building. With this, one of the dealers tries to do the same and ends up with a broken leg. We see Lino manage to escape, and the dealers return to their boss named Taha to tell him what happened, and then Taha got irritated when he realized 12 of them couldn't capture a single guy, and Lino had stolen 20 kilograms of product, which amounts to a loss of 1 million euros for Taha. So the boss asks if any of the dealers have any ideas to solve this problem, but they don't answer anything, and so Taha grabs his pistol and starts shooting at them. And to avoid being killed, K2 begs for his life and says he has an idea, and then Taha stops shooting to hear him, and K2 explains that Lino has a sister named Lola who works at the supermarket. So Taha orders the dealers to kidnap the girl to make her brother come to them. After this, K2 arrives at the supermarket and takes the girl by force. And there were several people around, and even so nobody did anything, since this district is basically a lawless land. Therefore, Lola is taken to the dealer's base, and we can see they have several laboratories to produce substances. One of the guys even puts his hand where he shouldn't, but Lola gives him a well-deserved punch in the face. Next, Lola is taken to Taha, and he says he'd like to see Lino's reaction when he discovers they kidnapped his sister. However, Lino jumps through the window and shows he already knew this, and then he takes Taha hostage and proposes a deal, explaining he'll let Taha leave alive if the dealers stay far away from the building where he lives. And then the boss agrees to this condition, and K2 ends up getting distracted, and Lola manages to steal his pistol, making the guy lie on the ground. So the siblings use Taha to pass alive through this hallway of men who are pointing guns at them. Then Lola and Lino steal a car from the parking lot and take the crime boss to a police station. And then they hand Taha over to the commissioner who runs the place. And soon after, a police officer comes in and says there are several dealers waiting outside the station. With this, the commissioner asks Lino and Lola to hand over their weapons so they can serve as witnesses against the dealer. So they obey and hand the pistols to the commissioner. However, the guy betrays them and locks Lino in a cell, explaining this district has no solution anymore, and he wants to avoid a conflict with the dealers. With this, Taha gets free from prison and punches Lola in the face, knocking the girl out. So Lino gets desperate and starts screaming, but he's locked in the cell, and so he couldn't do anything. And then the commissioner says he's sorry, explaining he worked for 15 years in this station, and now he's retiring to have a peaceful life. But Lino pulls the guy's head and traps it in the cell bars, and then he jumps high and delivers a kick, taking out the commissioner. Months after this, we go outside District 13 and meet a mobster named Carlos, who's cursing out a rookie for slamming his car door. And then the mobsters go to a convenience store that has a secret passage that serves to hide an illegal casino. So they enter the room where the security cameras are, and Sam says two suspicious guys have been standing in the convenience store for an hour. Sam also shows that a few minutes ago there were several police officers passing near the convenience store, and they might be planning to confiscate the 50 million euros inside the casino. So Carlos suspects there's an informant among them and shoots the rookie several times, but the poor guy wasn't the traitor, but rather one of Carlos's trusted men named Benito, who takes off his wig and reveals his real name is Damien, and he's actually a police captain. And then Damien orders all the mobsters to leave the room and asks his agents to drill through the ceiling and throw a rope. With this, he ties Carlos's foot to the rope, and the guy is pulled out through the ceiling, since the other mobsters are outside the room and they wouldn't let Damien pass through the door with Carlos. However, the mobsters notice everything everything is too quiet and starts shooting, and Damien even tries to return fire. But his ammunition runs out quickly, so the mobsters use fire extinguishers to break down the door, but Damien hides behind it and catches them by surprise, knocking out some of them with his fist. And then the agents in the ceiling throw 2 magazines of ammunition to Damien, so he reloads his pistol and takes out the remaining mobsters. After this, Damien leaves the room and finds more thugs, and he uses all kinds of acrobatics and crazy moves you can imagine to defeat them. Damien leaves the convenience store and meets Carlos, and then he pulls out 2 pistols and shoots several times at the mobster's car to get revenge, because Damien had to wash this car several times to earn the guy's trust. Later, Damien's superior calls him to talk, and explains that recently there was a robbery of an armored truck, where 2 children pretended they were cleaning the car windows just to obstruct the driver's vision, and then the children placed an explosive on the door to blow it up. This way, one of the dealers entered the vehicle and took control, taking the cargo to Taha. Back to the present, Damien asks what was in the cargo, and the secretary says the truck was transporting a powerful fragmentation bomb, which has an explosion range of 8 kilometers. The defense secretary also explains the dealers opened the briefcase, and by doing this accidentally activated the bomb, which will explode in approximately 23 hours. However, Damien explains he won't be able to infiltrate Taha's gang in just 23 hours, but the secretary says he'll have a partner who knows the place well. After this, we see Lino is serving time in a prison outside District 13 because he took out the police commissioner, so the guy is placed in a police van, and Damien disguises himself as a prisoner to try to gain Lino's trust. He even accepts taking a beating from these guards to make the story more convincing. So Damien is placed in the van and shows he stole the guard's keys while taking that beating, and then Lino asks what the guy did to get arrested, and Damien lies that he took out 5 dealers who worked for Taha because the crime boss eliminated his father and brother. Damien also says he wants revenge on Taha and that he's currently in District 13, taking advantage of a young girl named Lola, so Damien opens the van door using the key and climbs on top of the vehicle. And then he throws the guards out and takes over driving. Lino joins him in the front seats and both shake hands, but obviously the police don't chase them, since it's all a setup by Damien and the defense secretary to gain Lino's trust. But the guy doesn't want to be betrayed again, and so he handcuffs the officer to the steering wheel and threatens him with a gun to force Damien to break through the blockade and enter District 13. But the police there don't know about the secret mission, and so they shoot and use a spike strip to puncture the tires. With this, the van crashes into a red car, and Lino reveals he knows Damien is a cop, and so he leaves him locked to the steering wheel. Then the red car's owner arrives there and tries to take out Damien with a gun, but he kicks the door and knocks the guy down. And then another crazy guy appears and tries to attack Damien with a pipe, but the officer uses the pipe to break the steering wheel, and thus manages to free himself, fleeing the scene soon after. Meanwhile, we see Taha is treating Lola like his little pet, so K2 arrives there and says Lino escaped from prison, and then Taha pours a glass of champagne and dumps it on Lola's head, saying her little brother is coming to save her. Outside the place, Lino is watching Taha with a professional monocular, but Damien approaches from behind and punches him, handcuffing him right after, so Lino vents and explains what they did to District 13 is unfair, because several people didn't even commit a crime and were still punished with the construction of the walls. And then Damien kind of agrees with this and tells him about the bomb that can kill 2 million people, and is currently in Taha's possession. So the two decide to team up to solve the problem, and Damien explains the plan consists of Lino distracting Taha and the other dealers, while he acts stealthily to try to disarm the bomb. And after taking care of the explosive, both can focus their efforts on rescuing Lola, but Lino disagrees with this plan and calls Taha, saying he and the cop are in the building right next door, and the two have something that interests the crime boss. But obviously Damien gets irritated and doesn't understand how such a plan can work, but Lino asks for a vote of confidence from the officer, explaining he worked on the construction of the dealer's base, and so he knows the place where Taha must be keeping the bomb. K2 and the other dealers arrive there, and Damien removes Lino's handcuffs so they can prepare to fight. However, K2 comes in peace and explains Taha wants to talk to them. Meanwhile, the crime boss gives a scolding to a guard who was sleeping, and then he grabs the keys to a door and opens it, freeing a dangerous prisoner who was in there. After this, Lino and the officer arrive at the dealer's base and notice the armored truck that was stolen doesn't have a single scratch, which is pretty strange. And then both go to talk to Taha, explaining the bomb he stole will blow up everything within an 8-kilometer radius. Damien even says he's the only one who has the code to disarm this bomb, so Taha asks Lino to look through the telescope near the window, and so the guy does this and realizes the dealers placed the bomb on a launcher to send it outside District 13, and as if that wasn't enough, they also chained Lola near the bomb. With this, Taha says he won't give the bomb for free and wants money in exchange for it. And with this information in mind, the officer decides to make a deal for 20 million for the bomb, and Taha gives the number of a bank account that's in a tax haven, so the officer calls his superior and says there are 48 minutes left until the bomb explodes, and the dealers ask for $20 million for it. But Damien's superior says they don't negotiate with dealers and hangs up right after. However, the officer is smart and lies that they transferred the money, but Taha asked one of his employees to call the tax haven and check if the money came through, but the guy says the bank is closed and will only open again in half an hour. With this, Damien and Lino are placed on their knees to be watched until the bank opens again, so Lino says there's a secret tunnel in the bathroom, which he helped build when he worked on the construction of this place, and knowing this, Damien lies that they need to see Taha, but the guard who's watching them suspects this and won't let them go. but Damien explains Taha will lose millions of dollars and the guard will be to blame for this, so the guy gets scared of hurting his boss, and so he decides to escort them toward Taha's room. And as they approach the bathroom, both do a backflip and steal the guns from 2 guards, and then they exchange fire for a few moments and run to the bathroom, escaping through a tunnel that's under a toilet. Meanwhile, Taha receives the information that they didn't deposit a single cent in that account, and on top of that they used its number to track the other accounts that are in the same name, cleaning them out and taking almost all the money the dealer had. So the guards hear this and question what money they'll be paid with, but to avoid having to split the rest of the cash left in the safe, Taha pulls out his pistol and tries to shoot the guards. However, the gun was out of ammunition, and so the guards turn against him and take him out. With this, K2 becomes the new boss, and all of them leave the location to go after Lino and Damien. Meanwhile, we see Lola is trapped near the rocket, and so she pours a can of fuel that was nearby and grabs a box of matches to try to sacrifice herself for a greater good. Back to Lino, he and the officer jump over one of the thugs' cars to avoid getting run over. Then they separate, and Lino uses his parkour skills to climb a building, thus losing most of the thugs. After this, the two meet up again and arrive at the abandoned lot where the rocket is, but K2 predicted this and managed to intercept them. However, he asks both to disarm the bomb first, to resolve pending matters later. But when they climb the building, Lino and the officer find that dangerous prisoner Taha freed before dying, so Damien jumps and delivers a flying kick to the big guy, but the guy doesn't even move from his spot. And then the officer gets up and throws several bricks in the big guy's direction, but he breaks them with his arms, and soon after throws Damien to the ground. So Lino grabs a wire that was next to him and starts wrapping it around the big guy while dodging his punches. With this, the officer recovers and jumps really high, breaking a brick on the guy's head and knocking him out. Meanwhile, Lola lights one of the matches and throws it toward the fuel, but fortunately Lino arrives there at the same instant and catches the matchstick in the air, saving his sister's life. So the officer sees there are 3 minutes left until the bomb explodes and calls his superiors, explaining the bomb is in District 13 and he needs the code to disarm it. So the defense secretary and the commander give the code and Damien repeats it out loud to memorize it. But Lino hears the code and finds it strange that the last digits are D13, which is an abbreviation for District 13. So Lino explains the officer is being deceived and this code is meant to arm the bomb, to put an end to the crime district once and for all. But Damien doesn't listen, and so the two start fighting while the bomb's timer keeps decreasing. So Lino points out the contradictions in this bomb theft story, explaining the armored truck was intact there at the dealer's base, when Damien's superior had said the armored truck's doors had been blown up. But the officer thinks this is too absurd to be true, and attacks Lino to try to enter the code in the bomb. But fortunately, Lola gets involved in the fight, and manages to prevent Damien from typing the code. With this, the timer reaches 0, and the bomb simply shuts down, showing Lino was right all along. After this, they come down from the building, and K2 thanks them, letting the three take the bomb away from there. Later, Damien and Lino take the bomb to the commander and the defense secretary, and they start typing the code to intimidate the two. And with no choices, the secretary confesses what he did, and then Damien asks him to look out the window, and we see there was a cameraman recording the secretary's entire confession. A few days later, the scandal is broadcast in the media, and the defense secretary is fired, and the authorities decide to tear down the walls that were around District 13, so the people living there can have a more dignified life and be treated with respect. Finally, Lino and Damien say goodbye and make plans to meet up sometime to have a drink. Hey guys, were you surprised by this plot twist of the bomb theft being a setup? What would you do if you were in Officer Damien's place? Let me know in the comments.